Welcome back to another episode of the 2 Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler, and on today's episode, I interview Sophie Wadsworth. She's a talented executive leader, storyteller, and author. Now sit back and relax and enjoy this episode of the 2 Dates and a Dash podcast. What is up, podcast land? Welcome to another episode of the 2 Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. Before I introduce Sophie, you guys are going to love her. She's from up in Boston. We're not going to hold that against her. But we will talk a little bit about Kurt Schilling if she's a fan of baseball and the Red Sox at all, because Kurt, as everybody knows, is a fan of the show and was on the show a couple times and won a couple World Series with the Red Sox. But first, let's do a little housekeeping. If everybody can go in, like and subscribe the 2 Dates and a Dash podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts, whatever audio platform you listen on, you can probably find the show there. Just make sure you hit the automatic download button, so that actually helps me with my analytics and knowing how many people are actually downloading the show. If you want to find me on YouTube, just go to Matt Cubbler, and you can find all the audio on there as well, and the video for the show. Go to mattcubbler.com and go to there and learn all about me and things I've done in my career, and my book, A Brother's Love, a Memoir, which is a story I wrote back in 2006 about my life growing up with my brother Andy, who sadly passed away in a car accident in 1989 when I was 18. He was autistic and had a severe stutter, and it just, growing up poor in projects in the 70s when you are autistic and stutter wasn't necessarily the easiest life growing up, but being his brother was one of the greatest joys of my life. And that's just our story and from my eyes, and hopefully you can see my brother the way that I saw him. So once again, Brother's Love, a Memoir. You can get that on Amazon. You can go to my website, click on it there, and it'll take you to the Amazon link. But yeah, that's pretty much everything there is about me. Oh, and on YouTube, make sure you hit that little bell thingy, that notification. So I do other stuff on the channel other than the podcast. So if anybody wants to get alerted when I have a live video up or a new video up, that'd be great. All right, without further ado, Sophie Wadsworth, how are you?
I'm doing all right, Matt. How are you?
Great. It's been a little bit ping pong and back and forth, but we finally got a date set, and here we are. I'm happy to have you on the show, and I think everybody's going to enjoy your passion and your honesty and the way that you approach your world and your life and things you've done. And I'm really excited to share your story.
Well, thanks for inviting me to join 2 Dates and a Dash. Happy to be with you.
I love how not many people, you're like one of 3 or 4, because it's a weird name, right? 2 Dates and a Dash. You're like, what in the hell is that? And it very rarely do they ask. And you would think, like, if it said, like the title should have a meaning behind it, right? And if you're looking at it and you don't know what it means, why wouldn't you ask? And the fact that you knew what it meant is actually even better. And for those of you that are new to the show and don't know what 2 Dates and a Dash means, it's basically you're born. That's the date you're born. That's the first date. And the second date is the date you die. So those are the 2 dates. And the dash is the life that you live. And the show features people who are living the living shit out of their dash. Like that's the show. It's not specific about any one thing. There's no genre. There's no direct audience correlation for any specific nature. It's just people that are living the shit out of their life. And I really enjoy having conversations with people that do that. So I know I gave you about a 30-second heads up on the only question I really asked that's planned on the show. And it's not a simple question and certainly not a simple answer to some people. But I'm going to ask you the same one I ask everybody else. Who is Sophie Wadsworth?
Well, first, I'm new to podcasting. So I'm a new podcast guest.
Well, welcome.
And yeah, well, we could start there. You could count them on one hand. I've spent a lot of time at the microphone, but not podcasting. So this is a whole lot of fun.
Well, before you answer the question, I will tell you this. I didn't know what a podcast was in 2018. I just assumed podcasting was like radio, like sports radio or talk radio, that they would then record their live radio session and put it on their website. That's what I thought a podcast was. I didn't know it was this. I didn't know this existed. And then in 2018, when I was trying to build my speaking business up, and they're like, oh, you got to go on podcasting. I'm like, all right, how the hell do you do that? Like, how does that, do you just like find them on Facebook? Like, what's the process? So I became like a stalker And I got on like 18 in like 4 months, and some really big ones, ones that have, a couple 100,000 downloads and early on. And I remember Chris Lockhead, he's one of the greatest business guys in the country. He has a couple podcasts. The one I got on, I sent him a message, and he had like famous people on. So I sent him my link to my thing, and he goes, and he didn't answer me. And then finally I kept sending him stuff, and he finally answered back. He goes, listen, I just don't think you're a good fit. I'm like, well, why? He goes, what do you mean why? I said, why am I not a good fit? Like, I'm just curious. Yeah. What is it about me that isn't interesting enough for your show? And he goes, well, I'll be honest with you, I don't know who you are. I said, well, maybe you should Google me. And I'm not bragging or anything, but I got 20 some pages on Google of stuff. Some of it's repetitive, but it's there. I'm like, listen, dude, if you don't look it up, at least Google me, find out what I look like and find out what I've done, who I am. And if then you go, yeah, still not a fit, I said, I'm good. I've had no before. I'm okay with no. He emails me back and goes, listen, I fucked up. I want you on the show. I'm like, okay. So we had a great hour and 45-minute long conversation on this podcast. It was amazing. So it's when you start to really, if you decide podcast guest appearances are something you really want to do to help grow your brand or your business or whatever, which it is an amazing vehicle to do, I'd be happy to help you and introduce you to some people that would be good fits as far as what you're trying to do with what their show does. But it's so much fun having conversations. And you'll find out there are different styles of podcasts, and some you'll like and some you won't as a guest. There were a couple that I did. I'm like, man, I wish I'd never done that. And just wasn't that enjoyable of an experience. But then there's some you're gonna be like, man, I just want to repeat that. And hopefully this becomes one of those. I hope this is one of those shows.
Well, I don't have a lot of data points yet, so I'm excited. But everybody just know they got a rookie on the line here. So be easy on me, listeners. The
good news is I'm gonna be in like the top spot, right? For at least one, right?
Not a crowded field. There you go.
I'll be walking on there. I'm like, yes, she loves me. All right. So back to who is Sophie Wadsworth.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not done yet. Okay. New podcasting guest. Okay. Who is Sophie Wadsworth? I'm a writer. I'm a mom. I'm a sister. I'm a teacher. I'm a nature lover. So there's a list. And I want to get into some stories because there's lots of labels and names, and that's going to bring all kinds of stuff up in your listeners' minds. But to really, really dive into who I am, I think stories might be what gets us there. So tell me what kind of story you like. You can pick a time in the life. Yeah.
So here's what first thing that jumps into my head. When people answer that question, there are some people that have like the 30-second elevator pitch, all boom, it comes right out like a cannon, right? You knew they were waiting for whatever the first question is, that was going to be their answer. And then you have people that list their accomplishments as who they are, right? It's like a resume. Then you have people who are more ethereal and talk about like more like their being of who they are. And then you have the people who have roles that see themselves in certain roles. And I'm more of that. Like when I describe myself, the first word that always comes to me is
I loved before we started you talking about yourself as a swim dad. That's a great, very cool label. Yeah. Very cool role, I should say.
Yeah. And those things are like whatever you find value in, right? And it's not that any one of those answers is wrong. It's just that it helps me see where their brain's at. And my background's in human behavior and body language. So as I'm watching, that's why we do videos. As I'm watching people speak, I can tell whether there's matching, if they're congruent between their body language and what they're saying. And for you, when you listed your roles as like responsibilities, things that you physically are, and that's important to me. Like for me, I looked at, okay, she has a lot of value in her interpersonal interactions with other human beings. Like you should have said, I'm the CEO of this, and I'm a inventor, and I'm a thought leader or whatever. Well, you said I'm a mom, I'm a sister, I'm a mother, like all these are really direct connections to something, which to me is important to dive into. So if you had to pick I've had this question posed to me a few times, like, and there's no right answer to it, I don't think. I value when people say, are you a husband or a father first? And I'm like, I'm always a father first, because I made that. Like, they are me. They are of me and my wife. And my only responsibility on this planet is to ensure that the next generation of my family goes out in the world and accomplishes great things and continues on the legacy of greatness in our Cubbler name. And that's important to me, that amount of effort and energy goes out into my children. And then they're like, well, you can't be a great father if you're not first, spending the time and energy with your spouse. I'm like 100%. But if you led with the question, did you and your spouse come up with the plan that you were going to put all your energy and effort into building two amazing human beings with our children, then that was already a determined factor. We're in lockstep. We're congruent, me and my wife. We have the same wants, the same needs, the same passions, the same desires. So there isn't as much work on the external people seeing us. Do we go on a bunch of date nights? Maybe not as many as others, but it doesn't mean we don't love each other deeply, right? So if you had to pick one of your roles, the one that you would force rank, if you had to triage, force rank, which ones are the most important? Not that they're any less important, but your number one goal. Is it being a wife, a mother, your profession? Like, I'm curious, because I always it tells me a lot about where someone's brain is at, how they answer that question.
Well, that's going to be sidestepping, but they're really, I don't know that I can separate out the threads. I mean, if there's an oncoming car, I'm a mom. I'm not thinking about how I'm trying to help people transform in their lives. And when all is well and good, I can't really separate the two, I suppose, because being, someone who's caring for my family and, people in my life, it comes from this place where I'm doing the work that, I'm blessed to be excited to do. So when I'm not doing that, there's not a lot of me to give, and I can be, a mother and a wife and a sister and all these things and a daughter in name, but what is there really to give? What is there for me to draw from in being in relationship? So, but I love when they come together. How's that? Like, I love when I, served in the nonprofit world, when I would be helping, really energize the people who supported our mission and telling a few stories and introducing, some amazing animal scientist or author or musician to help us raise some more money for our cause. When my son was there and my husband, and they're listening to the stories, and my son in particular, who's 10 now, he's taken it in. I mean, that's the sweetest spot, right? Where I'm being myself and he's there, and I saw him before and I see him after. That's what's coming to my mind, Matt, as the answer is. That's the coolest thing, when we're fully alive in each other's presence, whatever it is.
I love that, because and the reason why I almost thought you would say that.
Because I'm predictable already, and we've just started.
When people don't understand, when you answer something that is a specific question, there's always a precursor component that should be asked, right? But it's not. When somebody just goes, "What's more important?"
Right.
Like when somebody asks me what's the most important thing to me, it's my children. Mm-hmm. But precursor to that is I build a strong relationship with my wife, or trust, where we each have our own strengths and weaknesses. We feed off each other, and we build each other up, and all these things that happen to make us really, really good at being parents. And if it wasn't for my 32 years of public service, of seeing the world and experiencing different things, and seeing the worst of the worst and the best of the best, and having all those things to draw from, I'm not a good father. So therefore, if I was going in without any of those precursors, I would not be good at what I do, and nor would the outcomes that I was wanting to see for my children happen. So everything is an amalgamation of who we are, if we allow ourselves to utilize and embrace all of those different facets. And when, I have multiple different things that I do.
Well, so I'm curious, Matt, what's a sweet spot for you in, your aliveness and your work and, that family role?
For me, it all comes down to service. So I've always been a servant. So that's just who I am. That's when somebody asks me, what do I identify as? It's a servant. And that's just, I've always been in that role, since whether I was serving my brother and taking care of him and making sure he didn't get beat up every day and trying to survive all that, and serving in the military and being a red, white, and blue bleeder myself, and then serving my communities and law enforcement and serving. I'm an entrepreneur, and I had a fitness business, and multiple gyms, and I trained athletes, elite athletes, regular Joes, neurological, neuromuscular patients. We did a rehab for them. So, I was always serving. So if I had not been able to absorb all of those lessons that I learned serving, my ability to be a father, a servant to my children, somebody's providing them with guidance and acceptance and love and discipline, and holding them accountable for their actions and providing them opportunities and helping them achieve. And then having a wife who's a stay-at-home mom who provided all the stability and love and caring and nurturing that they needed in addition to that. And so that it was all by plan. And it wasn't, I don't do anything that's not intentional. I'm very thoughtful in what I do. And whether it's the words that come out of my mouth or the actions that I take, I try to be as intentional with every one of them, knowing that someone or something could be impacted by it. And I always tell my son, my son's in University of Maryland, ROTC scholarship. And when he left, I wrote him a letter. And in that letter it said, "You are the single greatest accomplishment of my life because you are me. And I got to relive my mistakes and guide you through them so you didn't repeat them." Because he's literally he is me. He literally is me since he was a 2-year-old. I remember doing the same stupid shit when I was 2 in the same exact way, like all the steps along the way. So my son knows the responsibility that's on him as far as our name and as the male holder of that line of succession, and that there's expectations for him going into the military and expectations for him as he's going through ROTC and expectations on an academic level and all of those things. But he always knows that at any point in time, he can stop, call dad, and we can work through a problem. And I think that's where, when you have that connection, that intentional desire, and that you're able to communicate that too. That we're going to share stories from you, and people are going to see that communication is the key, and being able to convey a point or an emotion or a story is very important. And my mom is, she has Alzheimer's, and but I still talk to her every day. We have the same conversation every day. But she was an English teacher, and she was a Shakespeare literature teacher for 35 years. And my mom would always say, everyone has a story to tell, but not everyone knows how to tell a story. And when I wrote my book, it was after an emotional moment, after my 13 years after my brother died, that sort of created this emotional outpouring of stories in my brain. And I sat down, I typed them all out in one night, and it ended up being 26,000 words of just like saved files of stories that I put all together into one long document. I sent it to my mom, and I said, "Mom, what do I do with 26,000 memories of Andy?" And she said, "You write a book, son." And I said, I haven't read a book since Animal Farm in 9th grade. Like, I don't know if I'm overly qualified to write this book. She goes, "It's your life story with your brother. You can write that anytime." And I'm like, all right. So I did. So that's a long answer to a very short question. But all right. So the way you sculpted that answer was brilliant for me to understand you in a 2-minute answer. So my next question is when you wake up in the morning, and do you have a routine that you do every single day that gets you mentally and emotionally and spiritually ready to do whatever it is that is on your table, on your plate that day? Or do you sort of, because I know my answer to that question, do you have any routine or rituals or or processes that you have to get yourself in the right mindset every single day?
Well, first, thanks for that that sharing, Matt. It sounds like you had a really cool mom to say that you can write that book anytime. It's like total permission. Very cool. Yeah, and about your son, it's fun to think of him out there in the world. So yeah, well, tell me more what you want to know. You want to know about kind of the ritual of how I get.
What's it look like when you wake up in the morning?
First thing in the morning.
How do you get, because I don't then answer next. I have 3 questions lined up for this, but so when you get up in the morning, do you have does the day just sort of happen for you? Or do you have something like, is there an intentionality behind your preparation for the day?
Well, it's varied through my life and my life circumstances. Certainly, it was different when my son was very young than it is now, and different now than when I was living on my own right out of college with roommates or without roommates. So I would say, I'll just go back to, say a year ago. And I had a great routine going where I would walk in the morning. I read this fun book about habit. I guess that's a thing now, habit, a thing to write about. And I love the idea that you can nurture a habit, kind of jumpstart it by hooking it in with something else in this way that's very sticky. And so I love drinking coffee in the morning. So what I decided to try, since it was hard to be consistent about getting exercise, especially in the winter, is just to say, well, I can't start drinking my coffee until I'm outside. I'm just going to take it with me in a thermos cup. And it worked great. I never went behind my own back, I guess. And, sometimes they were short, but mostly, on the longer side. And I'm lucky to live, a place where there's trees and with quiet in the morning. So it was taken in the world in a quiet part of the day and watching the light come into the world. Sometimes the whole walk would be dark in the heart of winter, but most of the time I would get to see the light in some form. And just watching how everything sort of comes out of black and white and into color, and being quiet with my thoughts and the lives of the animals around me. And thinking ahead to things in the day, of course, and hopes and dreams, sometimes wandering around lots, sometimes really in the moment. I don't know, that's part of my experience in being alive, is there are times when I'm more able to be really present than others, sometimes where I would be paying a lot of attention to what I was seeing and hearing while I was walking, and other times where I'm very lost in my thoughts about what happened yesterday or what's coming up, especially in the working life as a nonprofit leader. Lots of things to think about. So that's one variation. There's a lot of variations on that theme of mornings.
Well, but I would argue that it's probably consistent in its intention. Like the goal is to create this inner peace, this continuity between yourself and what is around you, so that you can find the attention, the focus, the passion, whatever the term we're looking for is, from it. And that's, I find that people that have, I'm not one of them, but people that have that ability to create that morning ritual. And I know a lot of high achievers in the sales world and the marketing and the coaching, and they all consistently all have some sort of a morning ritual that they with the intention to create this space of focus and passion and compassion, because I guess in that world you need to have that attention to another person in order to help them achieve whatever it is, as a coach, to achieve whatever it is they're seeking.
Yeah, I think some of it also has to do with introversion, that I draw energy from that time alone. It's an important part of my being of service in the world and caring for other people, is that I have that time to fill up in quiet. you're making me think of something I haven't thought of for a while. Even when I was in grad school, I was getting my degree in English down in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I started this routine because the city is kind of this gritty grid of sidewalks, or at least the part I lived in. The old part of town is really cool, by the way.
I've been there.
Oh, you have? Oh,
Yeah.
cool. So you can picture it. And when the cottonwood trees are letting loose all of that, it's like snow with all those seeds flying through the air over the river. Well, then maybe you know the Tijeras Canyon. That's scissors in Spanish.
I've not been there.
On the eastern side of Albuquerque, but I would go up there very early in the morning. I had my first car then, a Mazda pickup, and I would drive out before or around the time of this. I tried to get out there really before the sunrise, depending on whether I could. But yeah, going up there and hiking and just seeing who I saw, the rabbits and such. Yeah, meant a lot to me. And it was an interesting time that I was moving between a lot of different worlds, which I found energizing in that time in my life. And it's really kind of a privilege, right? To be able to choose, oh, I'd like to do this kind of work or that kind of work. So I started out working at a law firm, like a secretary role. But it was domestic law, and people were so distraught. They were really sorting out awful divorces and stuff. And it really started to get to me after a while, even though I wasn't, handling the cases or in the courtroom or anything. It really started to wear on me, and I didn't know what to do. And I was doing so much thinking, of course, studying and all that, and sitting in the classrooms because it was live school there. That I got this idea. I knew another student who cleaned houses, and I thought, well, that would be a lot better to be moving my body. I'll make better money, actually. And I thought, well, like, I can just barely keep my little tiny, one-room apartment clean. I got to get like what this gig is about. So I went down and had a chat with the owner of Rosebud House Cleaning in Albuquerque. And I guess she thought I was okay and probably just young enough to do the work, and joined, one of the teams of cleaners, and went out and cleaned houses in Albuquerque with Rosebud for a while. So I mentioned that because going up into the canyon and writing, I was writing poetry then, and taking in the wildlife and the sunrise. And also I grew up in New York City and then lived in the Boston area right out of college. So this was a whole new environment for me, to be in the Southwest. Beautiful place. It never quite felt like home. It was so dry. It always felt like I was going to kind of dry up and blow away, but I love the beauty of it. And then to come back down into the city, go to my, graduate class and blah, blah about, Keats and Blake and all these poets or whatever we were doing. And then go clean houses, and really, really see what it's like in this tiny, just smallest glimpse of a way to do really repetitive manual labor in the muck. We cleaned some places like that a bunch of young people had lived in and just left, total wreck. We cleaned places. I didn't know places could get that dirty. And I was the new kid on the team. So I was definitely the one cleaning the worst of these places, which was appropriate, and I had to learn how to do it, I guess. But yeah, I just mentioned that because it's really interesting to think about what starts the day. And I think that's part of what gave me a center, is that I was up in the beauty of the canyon and I could take that with me. And I was very aware that that was such a blessing to me to have even the idea to do it, then have the ability to do it, that I was so footloose. I could just drive my pickup up anytime I wanted. Not to mention the fact I was getting to study whatever I wanted. Yeah. And then come and eventually I moved on and started my own business and put up flyers so that I could make more money and set my own hours a bit more and all that. Yeah, that was really a powerful time in my life. And I'm sure a time where if I think about it, I've got some stories.
Well, I think one of the things I took from that is that you were able to find uh, something that gave you joy
Mhm.
and that it was accessible every day.
Yep.
Like, I think people forget that they can create their own joy
Yep.
in a lot of senses, and that it eludes them as if it's it happens to them, right? Instead of them creating it.
Yeah.
And I think, in a service world that I've been in for more than 3 decades, I have it teed up for me every day, right? I don't have to go out and seek opportunities to help people. It's literally my job. So, and it's there and it's different all the time. So my only routine that I have is every day I wake up, I look in the mirror before I brush my teeth and I say, how are you going to impact the world today? And I don't have an answer for that. I just know that day I'm going to have opportunities, and my goal in life is to see them.
Mhm.
So when I mentor kids and I'm trying to explain to them how often they can help somebody in a day, and holding the door for somebody at the grocery store, or taking somebody's cart back to the thing, like anything that you can do that, and all that's doing is giving your brain the ability to identify,
Mhm.
like being aware of your surroundings. And situational awareness is huge in my world, and understanding threats. And I mean, I'm always at DEFCON 5 in my brain.
Mhm.
Ask my wife.
Mhm.
But that's, for me, it's more of an exercise in maintaining my sensory awarenesses and not getting complacent, not allowing things to become mundane visually,
Mhm.
auditorily. I need everything to be constant. And I tell people all the time, when I'm at my worst is when I have nothing to do.
Mhm.
When I'm in the silence, that's when I'm not good. Like, I'm not a happy person. I'm not. So when I'm on vacation for me isn't lounge around and do nothing for 7 days. It may not be activities, but there's got to be a value to every single day.
Mhm.
And we have, down the Jersey Shore, and my wife's parents have a house down in Avalon. So I'm lucky enough to, when my wife and kids are there all summer, and I go down on my days off when I can. But getting up in the morning and sitting on the beach before there's anybody there, and the big trucks coming by grading the beach and scooping up all the shells or whatever it does, and
Mhm.
um, but it's my chance to reflect and just sort of, and it has an intention,
Mhm.
figure out what I'm feeling that day, and that's what the music is on my headphones, and it starts this process for me. And um, I think we need to spend more time being aware of what's around us, as
Mhm.
a individual, as a collective family, and as a country.
Mhm.
We need to have a little bit more appreciation for what's around us. And we're not going to go down a political path, but I'm going to state something real quick, that when you lose a freedom, or what you perceive to be losing of a freedom, if you, before that freedom was lost, weren't appreciative of it, that loss of freedom is really impactful.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of people that aren't appreciative of what we have here in this country, the nation that we live in, the 245-year-old infant in the world's landscape of nations. In the historical perspective, we're just an infant compared to everyone else. And how amazing we are as an infant is what amazes me.
Mhm.
That in 245 years, we took the mistakes of every other known, the Ottoman Empire, everything, the Roman Empire. We learned from so many the things that can make America great, as far as what separates us from other countries. That when you when you take that for granted and don't appreciate it, and something is removed from you, a freedom, that hurts. And you don't know why it hurt until you sit back and look at it and go, man, this was pretty good until they shut us all down in 2020, right? Like, things are like, you forget
Mhm.
how being able to drive your pickup truck up to the top of that canyon and wake up in the morning and go, for a walk, and experience cleaning a toilet, like whatever, like those appreciations are not present every single day.
Mhm.
And for me, that's scary, that we have so many people that are not aware. And I don't know if that's technology or whatever, but something's caused that lack of awareness.
Yes, I'm curious about that. What is it that gives us that capacity to appreciate and the capacity to be in the present moment and be sort of awake to all that we have.
Yeah. Your lips to God's ears. I think it's personally, and this is just from my experience, and I am very aware. I'm probably to most people way too aware and too in tuned and too acutely sensitive to minor changes in things. And it's, as a body language expert, my kids hate it. My wife hates it. She can't just say nothing when I ask what's wrong, because she's gonna be like, I already know something's wrong. But let's just skip past the whole it's nothing and let's get to the root of the problem. But for me, I think the advent, I think we stopped parent. Well, there's two big things. One, dual parent households are at an all-time low. So whether it's a mother, father, mother, father, father, whatever, two people in the household is at an all-time low. So I think there's that missing component as far as parenting, on whether it's the male missing or the female missing or male, whatever. But there's
so let me just see if I follow that. So on the positive end, part of what nurtures our capacity to pay attention and be present is having multiple caregivers, right, in the household.
Yeah. And just examples of what it is to be a man, what it is to be a woman, or man, or whatever. I don't want to get geopolitical with that, but whatever the two person is,
what it is to be human.
Everybody has a role, right?
Yeah.
So having those two influences, I think, is very important. Having not had that, I can tell you I missed out on a lot. My dad left when I was 9 months old, and it wasn't until I was 12 and my mom remarried. And then that was its own, thing where a new person's coming into an established situation. And my mom, as amazing as she is, she worked 3 jobs. She worked, all the time. And we had constant, it was a village, literally a village.
So you had mentioned she was an English teacher. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, she was, but she didn't go back she taught, had kids, and then got divorced, and then struggled to get another teaching job. So she had to work for several years, 15 hours, 16 hours a day, working 3 different jobs in order to keep us in. So, and it wasn't until she finally got teaching in that we got out of the low income housing and all that stuff. But, growing up in that environment without a dad, there's a lot of things that I didn't get taught, right? That I didn't get those experiences. And it left a piece of me very cold and hard to that. And, I worked very hard to be a good dad by paying attention to all the male role models I had and mentors that I had in my life, and drawing from their greatness and the things that they really bestowed upon me helped me a lot to become a really great father. So I think that's one key component, is that that's at an all-time low in our country. And then secondly, I think technology, in that we've created a generation of instantaneous gratification, and people can't wait for things. They can't work towards something that isn't attainable today. And everybody thinks, I'm a cop for 30 years. And it took me a long time to get to the salary I'm at. And there's kids coming out of college or whatever that start as a cop, and they want to be making what I'm making. Well, I'm like, dude, I spent 30 years doing this. It took me a long time. My first salary was $19,500. Like, that was my yearly salary. And when I was in the military, there's guys that are walking out with a couple $100,000 from being in the military. My top salary was $11,300 my last year in the Army. Like, I get it, but have some patience, right? Nobody has not nobody, but there's a missing piece of our society that doesn't have that work ethic and patience to achieve. And I think part of that.
So what is it that, I'm curious, what is it that, empowers a kid? Take it outside of this context, because this is just one little moment in the arc of human history. But what is it that empowers a child to have patience and delay gratification? How do we do that for our children, and then even for ourselves as adults?
I just think it starts at infancy, right? I mean, how you parent is intentional. Like, it should be intentional. I've gone out on a limb on many conversations and said that everything that my wife and I have done as a parent had a plan behind it. We didn't willy-nilly anything. There was no winging it as a parent. I wing a lot of shit in my life, but being a parent is not one of them, because they are a reflection of us.
So tell me like one little anecdote of something where you could so I can see you as a parent, like doing something that helped your kids, delay some gratification, not getting it right when they wanted
Well,
it.
I'm a firm believer without struggle, there can't be an understanding of the process of that struggle to get success, right? So my kids struggled. We didn't give them anything. There was clearly they had a great home and, they didn't want for food or your clothes or anything, but anything they wanted, there was a work component to it.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter, like I said, she was a 6-time All-American swimmer, but she had a couple Division I offers, but they weren't full rides or anything like that. And she ended up going to Division II and being the greatest swimmer in her college, in the history of her college, and at a pretty big swim school there, and swam against Olympians at NCAAs from other countries, and she was the 5th fastest American in Division II, and that's pretty damn badass. But we had, in order for, I wanted to be able to pay for my kids' college. Like, that's one of my things. But there's not a free component to this. There is a work component. So she had to sign a contract that said she had to achieve certain grade point averages at any one semester. If she dropped below X, that there would be the null and void of the contract, and then it would be compounding interest on the time that I paid, that she would have to pay me back. And that's important to me, that she had that as an incentive. My son's an ROTC. He's got, minimum requirements he's got to do. And I set that even higher. I said, if you want, I'm paying his first, he got a 3-year full ride at the University of Maryland. So I'm paying for his first year of college. And I said, if you want that first year of college paid, this is what you have to achieve. So I don't think that there's enough of that. And I'm not saying I'm be all and end all parenting, but that's like, there has to be a struggle. There has to be some setbacks. There has to be some, whether it's taught or shown how to be resilient, and then to work back better, right? How to get up, dust yourself off, and go back at it again. And having all the experiences I've had, I've been to 40 countries or whatever, and I've seen everything in the world has to offer. I've seen people stoned to death in the middle of the street in the Middle East. I saw a woman get her hands chopped off. I've taken someone's life. I think I have a pretty broad perspective of what's out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I might be the anomaly as far as dads go, for the most part, as far as the way I've been able to parent. But I think just in the intentional act of parenting, I know so many parents that are just like, I want them to experience, I want them to formulate their own, like all these different things. I'm like, well, no, personally, I don't believe that. I believe that you should be putting in the stuff that is important to your family into your child. Like, I don't think there should be an outside influence in the formative years of your child that is counter to what it is you as a family believe. They're a byproduct of my wife and I. And I think they're going to go and live life and experience life, and they're going to grow and become hopefully better human beings. But certainly I think that the foundational component of a child's values and what they hold important as far as work ethic. And my mom taught me how to work. I saw her struggle. I saw how hard she had to work in order for me and my brother to have what we had, which wasn't much, but it was more than I thought we could ever have had, knowing that my mom worked that hard. And when we would get our sneakers from the bin at the end of the aisle in the grocery store, I know those were the best sneakers my mom could afford to buy me.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, I didn't go, yeah, she's holding out, right? So I knew that was the best. So I think that appreciation for the effort that
Mm-hmm.
parents go through, my kids appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate their willingness to be good listeners and good students to what we've taught them as far as their religious convictions and the moral convictions and their resiliency and ability to use critical thinking skills and all those things that I and my wife find valuable.
Mm-hmm.
They became good students. Let me ask you this, when in your world as a mom and you have stepkids, and I know that world, I am a stepkid. How do you approach your family life? What is your process? What is your philosophy behind parenting and being a wife and having that, forging that relationship, that new relationship as the new person in a stepkid's life?
Hmm. Well, that's a big question, and that too has changed over time. Thank you for describing some of what you've experienced in your life, and also that image. I just wanted to pause. That image of when you pulled those sneakers out of the bin, you knew that was the best your mom had to offer you, and what was sort of the fruit of her labor, really, that she was buying you these sneakers, and that isn't necessarily something all kids are given, that understanding of what has gone into the things that they have in their lives. That's just a very vivid image for me. And one of the gifts seems to me that she gave you an understanding, didn't try to hide it from you, the realities, that you were, it sounds like, probably privy to some things that she didn't necessarily have to share about how things were. Obviously, kids know a lot just through.
When my stepdad came into the picture, we had a already established life.
Yeah.
My mom, when you said my mom was probably pretty cool. My mom was cool. My mom was, grew up in the hippie world, and, she wore moccasins every day, and we lived, our next door neighbors were like Three's Company. I think there was some hanky panky going on between all three of them together. And there was always, bong in the center of the table, and hustlers and penthouses laying out. And like, I was around a lot of stuff at like the age of 7. So
locate me in a place, Matt. Where in the world are you growing up?
And outside of Philadelphia.
Outside of Philadelphia. Yep.
So
like a suburb, or further out, more rural?
No, suburb. Yeah, no, that's an urban. There's a bunch of we call them boroughs, but it's like little cities. Kind of like the boroughs in New York. I grew up in a borough of Pottstown, and so it's like a little mini Philly. But we had it was almost like a council. Like me, my brother had stuttered profusely, so he didn't really get a lot out on the table as far as offering speaking wise, but like we could say what was on our mind. Like I could say, I fucking hate my dad, just like that, at like 8. But I couldn't say fuck you to my dad. You know what I'm saying? Like, she allowed us the latitude to have expressive words that were probably well above our age demographic. And we talked about things, and she would say, okay, if you ever want to try marijuana, you have to do it with me, or Darcy and Russ, and the neighbors that were the Three's Company people, or whatever. Right? But that was our world growing up. So it was this established openness. And then my stepdad came in, and he was a hardliner and a pastor.
Oh, wow.
He was a drummer in a rock band, and then became a pastor, and has been a pastor, just retired this past July. 30 some years of pastoring, and actually 38 years, and phenomenal. I love him. But he was a hard ass, because he was 12 years younger than my mom. He's only 16 years older than me. So like there's this.
Whoa, wait, slow. Let me catch up with that. He was 16 years older than you.
Yes. So yeah, that's all he is. So my mom he's 12 years, almost 12 years younger than my mom.
So, but tell me again, your age and his age when you.
He was 26 when I was 10. They got married.
How old? And you're.
Yeah, he was 26. I was 10. Yeah.
Okay. Just wanted the listeners to take that in. Yeah. You're 10. That's my son's age. And your stepdad is younger than my stepson's. I mean, is like, the age when a lot of people don't have kids yet these days at 26. Like.
And he inherited a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old with autism and stuttering. So,
okay. And good thing he was a pastor.
Yeah, big thing, but it was a big change for everybody.
Had a connection.
Yeah. So that connective, that ability to have those open conversations stopped.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you are at home and you're with everybody's together, the stepkids, your son, your husband.
Yeah.
Was there always a kumbaya-ness to it in the beginning, or was it something that was awkward? Like, 'cause I'm not a stepdad, so I don't know that world. I know the stepkid version of it, and I can try to put myself in my stepdad's shoes, stepping into that situation, what that was like. but I don't really know it. What was it like to be the stepmom
Mhm.
in a world that you are now brand new and that's already been established?
Oh, well, it was really a privilege. These young men, they were, um, in their late teens, were such interesting people in their own right already. And I was lucky to have done a lot of living. Um, so I felt like it was really a conversation with I didn't know a lot of people at that time who were their age. And um, it was really like a privilege to get to know them. And sure, there were awkward moments, of course. And yet I found myself just very curious to hear what were they interested in school, sort of who were they as people. And as I watched, one of them in particular playing sports, and talked to the other one about his interest in literature and psychology and philosophy, I found other parts of myself sort of coming forward in a different way than, when my husband and I would talk, because these are young people with different interests, So, yeah, it was a whole new experience. I mean, mostly I just tried to show up and be loving and curious and without expectation. It was big change for everybody. And I think families are fascinating, the way they come together, the way they evolve over time. And I think it's been really fun for our son to have these two big brothers, each of whom were home for periods of time when they were in college, taking time off from their respective schools. So I think that was fun. And then now even more, and he'll have these memories more now, 8, 9, 10 years old, seeing them. So yeah, I mean, it's a big question, sort of how to navigate those waters and what it's like at different moments in time. And it depends too on where they are in their lives. I just draw a lot on my own experiences being a daughter and think, yeah, there were times where I was just caught up in figuring out my way in the world. And I didn't have a lot of bandwidth to have a lot of, phone calls or be in touch. And sometimes I was at a big distance. My parents are on the East Coast and I'm in Albuquerque. And so I think that helps me sort of understand how things ebb and flow. But boy, I love them. I love those two big boys, I call them. So
I think it's cool. And that, when I have some friends who married someone who had been married or had a kid already or whatever the case might be. And a lot of times they were getting into the relationship when the child was young. So, like 2, 3 years old. So that's a different,
yes.
The adaption component of it is a little bit different, because now you're still raising a child, you're instilling things in it, so you have more of a direct impact into the outcome.
Yeah.
And you came on the back end of the the youth phase, and
they had a great mom and continued to have a great mom all along the way. So I was just this other family member, this other person. It was, I think, a nice place to be, right? There wasn't a lot of responsibility on my shoulders. Just
but I think it's cool that I think I like the idea of having, because that's, I'm guessing the age gap between them is at least 16, 18 years between your son and your stepsons, correct? What's the age?
Yes, it's more than that. Yeah.
So, but having that almost like it's probably more like an uncle-ish kind of relationship with them, because it's hard to say. I mean, granted, they're brothers, but it's because the age separation is more of a uncle nephew kind of. They can be the cool, take them out, teach them cuss words, throw the ball, like stuff like that. So it's a little bit of I think that would be cool to have if I was your son, to have that. Like, I think that's a really cool thing. And I also think that they probably, if I'm putting myself in your stepson's shoes, as they see you raising their brother, they get a glimpse into what it would have been like had they been younger when you remarried, when their dad remarried. You know what I'm saying? Like seeing a
Yeah.
glimpse into what it could have been. Not that they would want it different, but just
Yeah.
looking glass kind of
Oh,
thing.
sure.
I think I find those things fascinating. Like those.
Yeah, it's like when we go over to other people's houses as kids or as adults, go visit, visit with friends or family, and you just see like, wow, this is what it's like here. I mean, we went camping with our neighbors last weekend, and they're Bengali, and it was fascinating just to cook with them and to live with them for this little window of time at the campground, and their daughter, they've got a 9-year-old, and it's fascinating just how other families communicate and make their meals and just do their thing. It's fascinating that just the variety in human beings, and gosh, I grew up, I was so different in a lot of ways than a lot of my classmates and peers. I had 2 working parents, working full time. My mom wasn't home. There were no like cookies after school. I didn't have friends over after school. I went to other people's houses and saw how they lived. I was just brought up to be independent. And it was sort of like, what do you want to be when you grow up? It was really different than some of the kids I hung out with. And it was great to go over there and say like, oh, this is what it's like when a mom throws a birthday party for, 10 or 15 kids. That's what that looks like. So I'm kind of like, I'm drawing on that now as a mom, sort of, but it's just so interesting how many kinds of families there are and ways. I also think of multi-generation families too, right? I think there's a lot of wonderful things too about having the grandparents under the same roof and all those stories, and somebody to pass the kids off to, like, and just that history. On a related note, somebody was talking the other day about the stories that we inherit and the power of them. And just how important it is to tell each other our stories and tell kids our stories, have them know what they can about their family story. And I thought that was really fascinating. And the idea that there are sort of different narratives running through it, like, well, we had nothing and then we worked and we had luck and these things happened and then the family became prosperous and all these good things, and this is where we are, aren't we blessed? Or the other side where we used to have so much abundance, and look at the photographs in the fancy Ford motor cars or whatever, and now this turn of events happened, and
some hard luck
in between, and everything in between. I'm thinking of also a guy named Ed Hajim. I don't know if you know his work. I think it's called From the Orphanage to the Boardroom, but he had a really tough childhood, thus the orphanage in the title, and ended up this extraordinary leader, and had quite a journey in between the two. And then, of course, families move back and forth. That's, I think, where the real truth is the moving back and forth over time. Anyway, I love to think about stories and think about how the presence of other family members and the way we stay connected and who we have in our household and who we invite into our household influences us and our children, but us too as adults, just the stories we get to hear about each other and what we're going through.
I think you brought up such a great point, because my son, like I said, he's in college with ROTC, and 2 weeks, like I spent all my time with my daughter swimming. My son swam, but he only swam because we made him. He was very good, but he wasn't passionate about it. My daughter loved swimming. So, I spent all my vacation time traveling with my daughter to, college swim meets and NCAAs. And, these are week-long events, some of them. And so I spent a lot of time with her and intentionally on her. So he didn't really get as much of that because he's going on ROTC and it's not really an attendance event for parents. So there's no ROTC games or anything like that. So we went on a 2-week no plan road trip out to Montana. And I bought some land out in Western Missouri with my best friend from the Army who lives out there. And so we're going to be building a house and retiring out there. And I bought like 30 acres. So we're going to have nice chunk of land. So we drove out there and spent some time on there, and then hit all the national parks and all that stuff. So the reason that I'm bringing this up is we're sitting in Rocky Mountain National Park and illegally camping, and we're sitting out on a rock overlooking the cliff in the Rockies. It's like 9 o'clock at night. We have some music playing on the phone. We're drinking some Tito's and Gatorade. That's what we were drinking. And we're just talking about life and about the future. And he goes, Dad, the reason I want to go in the military and the reason I chose this path is because of you. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he goes, you telling stories about your time in the military and you talking with Uncle Toby about what you guys did together. He goes, I want that. Mm. He goes, I want to be able to have those moments and then tell those stories to my son. Mm. And that was an important moment, that because you don't know how much they're listening, right? You assume they are, but you don't really know. And, to have that confirmation that the stories that I share, which are part of who I am, and so they get to know me in all different contexts, that they sit in and they sat in this part of his brain for all these years. Was pretty cool.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. You're out there in the Rockies, and he's letting you know those stories really got right in there.
Yeah.
Stayed with him and gave him a kind of a map. I was thinking of when you talked about you don't know what goes in and what they remember. I was thinking about when I taught high school in my early 20s, and after a few years in, one girl who had graduated came back, and she made some offhanded comment, about, well, it's so important to question authority, and I said, well, who told you that? She'd gone off and done some other things. And she said, oh, you did in 9th grade. I remember it, and I think the reason she remembered it is, it's a great phrase. It's a great lesson to teach, not to take everything as given, but to make sense of it ourselves. But I think it's because she was in that class where kids had been talking about this neighborhood in Tacoma that was kind of a tough neighborhood. It was called The Hill. And I was new to Tacoma, Washington myself. And I took this in, and they were just really talking it down like it was as if it was Hell's Kitchen or something. I grew up in New York City. I knew what a bad neighborhood was, and I was kind of skeptical. And I think growing up in a big city gave me a different lens to look through from the get-go, and I thought, I'm not going to say anything, but on my next day off, I'm just going to take a little stroll through the hill. So I'll admit, I put on, some pretty plain clothes. I wasn't dressing like a teacher, for the classroom. I was, just on a little mission of observation. And, it's broad daylight, and I'm just walking down the street, and there are people on their porches, and there are people who talk to me on the sidewalk and shouted from the porches, some friendly, some just kind of curious and maybe trying to get a reaction. Nothing really worthy of note, nothing to make a story of. The story was when I came back to the classroom the next Monday, and we were all talking about how our weekend was. And I said, well, I took a walk through the hill because I was curious hearing everybody talk about it, if it's really as bad as everybody says. And the faces of the kids who really knew the inner city were like horrified, like that the naive, early 20-something teacher would be doing this. And I said, it really wasn't like people have been describing to me at all. And I just described some of the people that I had chatted with and what I saw. And I was like, no shots were fired. Nobody came up in a car and, told me to get in,
I didn't buy any crack on the corner.
No, nobody offered me anything. No, not even Gatorade. And I think that made a tremendous impression. I'll bet that was better than any English or geography I taught her, and probably some of her classmates that year, that they said, oh, that's what it means to go see something with your eyes. And I cautioned them. I said, this isn't something for everybody to do. I'm a grown up doing a little, little tour on my own. I can make my own decisions, about what I think is safe. That's part of being a grown-up. So I gave them that caution, of course, but I think it was much better than talking about it or even drawing examples from history. I was like, this is who I am. I'm not going to sit here and listen to all this talk about the Hill, especially knowing that some of the kids here live in neighborhoods a bit like that. And just take that as given, So I think that, those stories are powerful. We don't know what's sinking in is so true.
So when did you decide? I mean, you've talked about that you've had some secretary job, you cleaned some toilets, you were a teacher. When did the entrepreneurial bug kick in? And when did you start to realize that that's your calling is to control your own outcomes based on your own abilities and efforts?
I think I had it to some extent all along because I took time after grad school and pieced together a life so that I could write, which in hindsight is pretty entrepreneurial, that I worked at a university doing administrative work for a couple of professors and a little bit of editing, but mostly it was clerical. And then I taught part-time. So I taught adjunct, as an adjunct professor at the University of Massachusetts in Lowell. And then I did some workshops for adults in creative writing on my own, put up my flyers, that's pretty entrepreneurial. And then what I was doing with the best of my energy was writing, because I really wanted to write a book of poetry, which I had started, before I put all this together. I'd started in grad school, but I think that was pretty entrepreneurial. And then over time, I just got swept into the nonprofit sphere, and I really wanted to be more of direct service in one kind of mission. And just fell in love with the mission of an organization outside of Boston called the Nature Connection. That's bringing nature and animals to people who can't get outside much, so kids who are living in residential schools, elders who have dementia or in secure residential programs, and people with disabilities who they get outside some, but they certainly don't get the chance to, have a pet living with them necessarily, or that kind of contact with the natural world. I just love that mission. I just thought, wow, the idea. I started volunteering, of course, so there you go. And then I just got so caught up in the power of bringing those animals and those elements of nature right to people's hands. So when a job opened up, I took it, and that was in development work, so writing grants and fundraising. And then I became executive director. And I mentioned that because that was sort of the segue, but also because that in itself is entrepreneurial. If you're running a small nonprofit, you are running a business. Even though you have a boss, a board of directors, you're leading this little ship, this little tribe of volunteers and staff, and all the clients were amazing, the program directors and all the people that we visited, and then the volunteers who took care of the animals. It was this whole amazing operation. I did it for over 10 years. Just a great blessing to be a leader there. And I learned so much. And so the transition was coming to this place in my life where I felt that I wanted to spend more of my time tapping into storytelling, helping other leaders get their mission out there, figure out public speaking, because there's so much that can be learned. Figure out what are the stories that we have to tell, whether someone's a CEO or, a fundraiser at a nonprofit, or a startup or anybody. So many good stories, and just figuring out how do you gather them up, and how do you really make them your own, and then share them out so people get all the good things we're doing. So it kind of fell together earlier this year as just a really exciting opportunity to pull these pieces together. And of course, I'm a teacher at heart too, so the chance to train people and help people get better at what they want to do is always just a great gift, really an honor.
I think one of the things that as you're telling me all these different phases of your life and places you've been and jobs you've had and experiences you've had, one thing I notice, I've been in all kinds of online social media, speakers, creating content. Like I've been doing it all, and more so just, I do it just as like an experiment, like just as, okay, well, let's try this and see what happens. So I don't
Yeah.
really put a whole lot, none of it's my business or anything like that. I just do it more to see if I can crack the code more than anything else. But what I see is across the board, and it goes back to our conversation about why are people unable to be patient and put in the time and the work and the effort. There's a lot of premature success coaches. There's a lot of premature life coaches. There's a lot of premature business executive coaches. There's a lot of premature name, fill in the blank, that are not where they should not be there yet. They don't have the breadth of experience and knowledge to draw from to be successful. But because they see how the there is a metrics behind how you become a online brand person through, whether it's your shtick and speaking, whatever your angle is on your public speaking, or coming up with content and selling it for $49.96. Like all these little, I wrote a book and it's 14 pages and I got somebody to buy enough of them online for $1 and it became an Amazon bestseller. So now I'm an Amazon bestseller. Like all these little smoke and mirrors nonsense to get them to look as if they are this established, well sought after whatever. And I think we're in a world where there's a lot of premature. People are trying to get to the end before they put in any of the time and effort and work and experience that would actually make them very good at their job. And I think what I'm hearing from you is that you've allowed, and I think you do have a little bit of a flower child feel vibe to you, that you allow the world to sort of be part of your journey. Like this, the spirit of the world helps guide you through the decisions, the places you've been in your life. And nature clearly is a grounding force behind all of it. And I think allowing that natural progression of your life to take its course, and then being aware that it's happening, and then understanding that at the different changes that you've made in your life, and going from teaching to the nonprofits to now doing your own business, is probably more of your life experience intuitiveness than it is any grand plan that you had from the very beginning. And I'm very much the same. I have not really, I've been an entrepreneur my whole life without really knowing that I was an entrepreneur. I had a very good term paper writing business in high school where I was getting paid to write other people's term papers. I was a low-level drug dealer. So I was really had a decent little income coming in from weed. I had a hall pass forging business. I was able
hall pass forging.
Yeah, I was able to forge 3 different teacher signatures perfectly, by the way, like really, really well. I would sell them for $2 a piece. So I was always an entrepreneur, but it was more because like I said, my mom could only afford so much. So if I wanted anything, and then I also worked 40 hours a week since I was 14. So like I was always a hustler. And I had my own bodyguarding business and I did a lot of things, but I didn't look at those things as entrepreneurial. I looked at them as, I just like doing that stuff. Yeah, so be it. And it wasn't until I started actually brick and mortar businesses, and I have 4 patents, and like I have all different kinds of stuff that all in a direction of entrepreneurial, but none of it was planned. I borrowed $150,000 from somebody I didn't even know to buy my first company with no clue what I was doing and whether or not I was even able to pay that person back. And my wife's like, "What in the fuck did you do? We don't have $150,000. I'm like, "I know, I don't fail." She's like, "But you don't even know what you're doing. You know nothing about the fitness world. What did you do?" I'm like, "I'll figure it out." Figured it out. So it didn't mean it wasn't hard, but certainly wasn't, it wasn't a well thought out, but it was one of those things I'm like, yeah, I'm in. And then once you're in, you're like, oh crap, I'm in. And then, and then you got to start really figuring out how to solve the problem. And
well, that's life, isn't it? Like we just get ourselves into trouble So that's what I feel like I'm doing right now on purpose, getting myself into trouble. Like, yeah, I'll do that. Yep, I'll speak. Oh yeah, I'll write a story with that theme. Sure, I'll speak at that event, and then there it is on the calendar. In there, yep, got to figure that out. And it is kind of an interesting way to live, isn't it? I mean, I'll say I think having a parent who, or both parents, were kind of in these really clear tracks in business kind of jobs. I knew what that was about. There was no mystery in that. And so, I think some of it depends on what's a mystery to you and what you've been, I mean, we're back to the sort of like the stories you grew up with, but what you were handed as far as where the joy was, where the energy was, and where it wasn't. And in my case, I heard some of where it wasn't. And, working for the man, I was never encouraged to go work in a big company and be a little cog in a wheel. It's like, just don't do that. Whatever you do, just don't do that. So it's like, there's a lot that isn't that. I guess that's the road I've been on. This feels like the last chapter in a lot of ways, Matt. I feel like I could ride this wave a long time.
And it's only because you've had the experiences you've had. Like you wouldn't, if you were like, I walked into, and this is no lie, I walked into my entrepreneurial world, the real entrepreneurial world that I consider my real entrepreneurial world, scared as shit to death. I had no idea. I was so out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
I'm a get shit done guy. And you give me a task, it will get done. And I looked at it that way, but then I'm like, there's so many moving parts that I don't understand. I've never done a spreadsheet in my life. I don't know what a P&L statement is. I don't know about forecasting. I don't know about the equipment we bought. We bought a patent and some equipment that was patented and moved it from Florida to Pennsylvania, and it arrived broken. And it didn't have any
for what kind of equipment?
Strength and conditioning equipment.
Yeah.
And it's a patented piece of it. It's not like a standard piece. It's its own thing.
Yep.
And we bought it from the inventor and
wow.
It arrived broken. And I had to figure out, first of all, what it was. It's like, I don't know. I'm not a mechanical guy. Like when I tell you, I didn't get a lot of stuff because my dad would have been really helpful with.
Yeah.
I don't have mechanical ability. And I'm looking at this thing and it looked like, like I was looking at an empty canvas and somebody told me to paint the Mona Lisa without knowing what it looked like, and it was very difficult for me. So, but that exercise, very difficult exercise in solving the most complex problem of my life at that point in time, gave me a lot of confidence in my problem solving ability moving forward. And I think with you stayed within this sort of within a hand grenade of each other. You're always in this world of speaking and teaching and nature and like all the things that are important. You sort of flowed within that journey, and it brought you to this really natural conclusion. If this is your last chapter, which you can then, I think there's probably a lot more confidence you going into this than I was going into mine.
Oh yeah. I mean, when you've run a nonprofit with all the pieces of the business, yes. And I can appreciate it differently too, and sort of, I know where I need, to work hard to figure things out. I know where I need to, really put my time and energy, and that's helpful. And also I can help now give other, people that confidence. That's one of the things I just long to do. It's, some of it can be learned, and I, I find it really, fulfilling to help people just find the confidence they already have in them, and just sort of find ways to just tap it differently and not be distracted by all the wackiness around them, or what they think their boss might want, or they're not sure, and how to be an investigative reporter with your own boss, and how to speak like the leaders that people are inside of them. They just don't know how to claim more of a place at the table, I guess.
Right. That's
this one thing I've noticed is it's just changing the way you talk and the way you get ready for a meeting. They've got it all in them. It's just kind of goes back to when somebody lobs you a question. You don't have to answer the question right away. You can say something before or you can ask them to clarify it if you're like a deer in the headlights. You don't have to answer the question on the spot.
Oh.
That can be so liberating, something that simple.
And that's most thing, keep it simple, stupid came up was a thing, because it's really, we complicate things more than they need to be. And I think I'm a very linear triage. I take the most important thing, knock it off, go to the next. And I can do that multiple times at the same time, but I can't solve all the problems in one. But if you give me 10 problems, I can triage all 10 at the same time.
I'm going to keep that in mind, Matt. Yeah.
For me, that's the only way I operate. I can't, and my business partner, he's a great guy. I love him. It's like a brother, but he has a saying on our whiteboard in the office. It says, "Is this the most important thing you should be doing today at this moment?" Mm-hmm. And if it's not, then why are you doing it? So also keeping that in mind is really important too, is this really as important as you think it is right now?
So if I get to that place where my head's spinning and I got a dozen things on my list that all seem like number one, can I call you up and say, Matt, triage with me?
That's it. Well, listen, we can do this all night long. I promise you, this has been a great conversation. And like I told you, sometimes they're 45 minutes, sometimes they're an hour and a half. We're coming up on, an hour and 20 minutes or so. So we really got into a nice little groove there. And I'm sure this could naturally continue on for even longer. But why don't we tell people where they can find more information about you, your website, email, anything else you want to put out there for the listeners?
Sure. Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, and my website, which is being built. It'll be out in a few weeks, depending on when you're hearing this, sophiewadsworth.com.
Love it. Keep it simple, right?
Yeah. I can remember my own name. So.
and that's what you want people to remember anyways in your business, is your name. And that's, mine's mattcubbler.com, because I'm my own person in my own business. So
I wanted to ask you, does Cubbler have a meaning that you know of?
No, I don't know. I don't talk to any of them. So that's the only downside with when you were talking about families. I have no stories to share.
Yeah.
You're
just making them.
Yeah, and it started. We're first. I look at it as a first generation Cubbler. So
yeah.
I don't have. My grandmother was an alcoholic, wonderful woman. My Cubbler grandfather died when I was right around the time my parents got divorced, and. But my grandmother would just tell lies. She was drunk all the time. And the lies that were amazing, like the most well-crafted, believable lies ever. My entire childhood and belief of my family history was a complete figment of her imagination. But she would tell them so clearly and the same way over and over again. So it wasn't like in the moment drunk, but these were real, the way she wanted to believe our family was. Those were the stories she told. And it wasn't until many, many years later when I had a relationship with my uncle, my dad's brother, which I didn't have until 2006. And sadly, he died in 2014. But I got sort of like a condensed historical lesson on my family, and found out my grandmother was full of shit, but she was a great storyteller. So that's what I got out of that. But I do appreciate you taking the time, being so open and honest, and just very relaxed in how you told your stories and interacted with me. And sometimes I felt like you were interviewing me, which felt great. We had a really good back and forth. So it was a enjoyable hour and 25 minutes that we just spent together.
Well, thanks for sharing your stories. Really a pleasure.
Well, hang tight. We're going to talk off air. I'm going to close out the show. Everybody, thank you once again for listening and watching this episode of the 2 Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. Thank you again to Sophie Wadsworth for being our special guest today. Please visit her website when it comes up and find her on LinkedIn. And if she can help you, I'm sure she will be more than eager to do so. Once again, you go to mattcubbler.com to learn more about me, get a copy of the book, A Brother's Love, a Memoir. Go to Matt Cubbler on YouTube, Matt Cubbler on Instagram. I've been banned from every other social media, so that's pretty much the only place you can find me. Proudly banned. But I truly do appreciate all the listeners. I appreciate everybody who is loyal. Loyalty is a big thing in my world, and I truly do appreciate you for being so. All right, everybody, God bless, take care, and go out and be kind to one another.